just when Vintage players started asking for 3 mana permanents to be released from the restricted list, WotC has gone ahead and previewed the very first 3 colorless mana Planeswalker. Welcome back, Vintage gamers, to a new episode of Voice of Vintage. Right after I talked about how Magic players wanted to see a shakeup in Vintage, maybe some unrestrictions of cards that couldn't be played in Lurrus decks, Wizards of the Coast blesses us with this very clear Vintage power level and Vintage staple Tezzeret Cruel Captain. So we're going to go through each and every part of this card, and I'm going to tell you all the things it does inside of the current Vintage format. I'm going to go through all the Vintage decks that exist that will try to play this card, and maybe even some new options that might emerge with the introduction of this card. I'm going to do this a lot like the Atraxa video I made a few years back. Basically, a full and complete breakdown of Tezzeret Cruel Captain. So, the number one thing to look at is this casting cost. This is the very first ever 3 colorless casting cost Planeswalker. And if we can use the previous Karn the Great Creator as an example, 4 colorless casting cost was achievable with slight stretches to mana base and things like Grim Monolith having to be added to existing workshop decks at the time. 3 colorless, on the other hand, is very castable by non-artifact decks, non-shops decks. This card is going to be cast off of like Island Mox, Island Mana Crypt, Ancient Tomb Mox, even Workshop can go Workshop Monolith, play this card. So 3 casting cost is very non-prohibitive, besides the fact that it cannot be played within a Lurrus companion deck. So what are we going to look at here in terms of loyalty? We see 4 loyalty, a pretty reasonably high, but it can't increase in loyalty except for its static ability. Whenever an artifact you control enters, put a loyalty counter on Tezzeret. Now, there's a couple things to point out about this one. It's whenever an artifact you control enters, not an artifact is cast. So simply casting a card off of this Tezzeret is not going to be good enough. It has to enter. I'm going to run through all the abilities real quick so you have a baseline of what the abilities do, because they do interact with each other in very, very meaningful ways. So with the 4 starting loyalty, and the loyalty going up when artifacts you control enter, there's a 0 mana ability, which untaps an artifact or a creature. It does not have to be an artifact creature, an artifact or a creature. If it was an artifact creature, however, it gets a 1/1 counter. Its -3 ability is going to be its staple Vintage ability. Search your library for an artifact card with mana value 1 or less, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. Note here, this is mana value 1 or less. This is not the same templating as Urza's Saga, so it can find things that cost, say, 1 white. And then -7, its ultimate ability is you get an emblem at the beginning of your combat on your turn. So at the beginning of combat, so even if you ultimate, you're still going to get this right away if you ultimate in the pre-combat main phase. And put 3 1/1 counters on any artifact you control. If that artifact is not a creature, it becomes a 0/0 robot artifact creature. So those are Tezzeret's abilities, and all of them have meaningful impact in Vintage, and let's go through them. So, one thing we want to circle back to here is whenever an artifact you control enters, put a loyalty counter on Tezzeret. Because this is not cast, token-generating cards that generate token artifacts will be highly synergistic with Tezzeret's loyalty. Thinking things like treasures, maybe artifacts that make a large quantity of artifact creature tokens when they die or something like that. Those cards will be highly synergistic with Tezzeret. It's also just going to reward further artifact play, so it's obviously going to be highly rewarded for putting in a deck with lots of artifacts. Probably a Mishra's Workshop deck is probably your safest bet to if you want to up the loyalty count on this card. And it's really worth noting because it is entered not cast, if you search for an artifact with its -3 and you cast it and it doesn't enter play, it gets countered on the stack, you will not get that loyalty back, and your Tezzeret will be starting at an initial 1 loyalty after you pass the turn, if you have no other further artifacts to play. So those are all pretty important. for loyalty to start with no way to plus is a really hard to gauge breakpoint. It's going to really depend on like how many artifacts you have in your hand, because there are a lot of creatures right now in Vintage that will be attacking this card. So if you don't have creatures in play early, it might be hard to keep this in play for a while. The big breakpoint here is, can you get this artifact back up to 3? Get this Tezzeret back up to 3 again. If you can -3 twice, it's probably extremely strong. If you can -3 twice and it lives, it's probably very strong. But we'll have to see exactly how this fares. Because it has no ability to go up naturally, it's very hard to judge what this loyalty looks like in the context of Vintage. If you remember Narset had no ability to go up at all, and that didn't prevent, but it encourages some odd situations in terms of activating and attacking and blocking, where sometimes you would minus Narset twice and then it would die, and that would be okay. And sometimes you would not minus Narset at all because you didn't want it to die. So lots of weird things going on with this loyalty. Now let's talk about the abilities. Untap target artifact or creature. If it's an artifact creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it for 0. So every turn you can do this, no matter what, your Tezzeret will stick around. Untap a creature that's an artifact and it grows is really nice. It's going to fit right inside of, Patchwork Automaton style decks. Worth noting that untapping like the Germ token of a Nettlecyst won't get a counter on it here. Something like Flesh Raker won't get a counter on it here. But a lot of the art, Scrawling Crawler will get counters. Patchwork Automaton will get counters. Golos will get counters. Those kind of things. Stonecoil Serpent, those kind of cards. The untap is really interesting because if it's an artifact creature, you might want to use this 0 pre-combat to get an extra damage in. But if it's a non-artifact creature, you want to use this untap post-combat to get pseudo-vigilance. Maybe even if it's an artifact creature, you want to have vigilance more than you want to have a 1/1 counter, you might use this ability post-combat to untap the creature you attack with, to then protect the Tezzeret on the following turn. The fact that it can untap things like Thundertrap Trainer and Flesh Raker are pretty interesting. I would have assumed this card would only be able to target artifacts, but being able to target creatures here is really interesting. And then obviously, if we're not targeting creatures, what are we targeting? There are really, really powerful ones. The most important one is by far Time Vault. Not everyone might remember. Some people might remember Tezzeret the Seeker, a classic Vintage staple that used to tutor Time Vault by itself and then go infinite by untapping Time Vault with its own ability. Here, we don't have the ability to search for Time Vault, and we probably won't have the ability to search for Time Vault unless we end up in a blue deck with Demonic Tutor. But the fact that it randomly combos infinitely with your Time Vault is going to be a nice little upgrade. The second biggest thing is probably going to be that it's untapping Mana Vaults and Monoliths. Monoliths. Grim Monolith specifically, and Mana Vault. There are a lot of decks already playing Grim Monolith to cast non-artifact spells inside of Workshop decks. This is going to go right at home. The fact that you can go Workshop Monolith, cast this card, untap Monolith right away is going to give you a huge mana advantage, and you're going to be sitting with a basically free Planeswalker in play. Obviously, this also works with things like Soul Ring and Mana Crypt to produce a bunch of mana. Even simply untapping Sapphire might give you an extra blue mana. That could be really important. So obviously, untapping all these mana rocks is going to be very good. It's also going to be untapping the One Ring. There are multiple Workshop decks playing the One Ring in Vintage. Untapping a One Ring is a obvious synergy here. The One Ring is going to get even more cards every time you untap it. Lots of these decks already play multiple Voltaic and Manifold keys to untap the One Ring. And you could even hit some kind of creature like maybe a Deathrite Shaman. This does untap a creature, right? And so if you want to use a Deathrite Shaman twice in one turn, maybe, that's a very much a stretch here, but maybe there are other creatures that have activated abilities that aren't really seeing play in Vintage right now that you can activate twice in the same turn. I guess when you think about it that way, you could even untap a Nadu or something to trigger a Nadu. Lots of weird things you can do with this ability because it's templated to hit any artifact or any creature, regardless if the creature is an artifact or not. That is probably the second best ability on this card. The true Vintage ability here is this -3. This -3, search your library for an artifact with mana value 1 or less, is the make or break of this card. If this ability is good, if you can activate this ability multiple times with this Planeswalker, that will be what pushes this over the edge of being a good card, or a card seeing some play, to being a great card. The number one thing that I feel this card gets is a pair of restricted cards Vexing Bauble, and Chalice of the Void. You are only allowed to play one Vexing Bauble and one Chalice of the Void in your deck. This acts as an additional 4 copies. Chalice of the Void, notably here, is a 0-drop XX artifact, and it's mostly going to be played on turn 1 for 0. You can play a Tezzeret on turn 1 and search up Chalice of the Void and cast it right away. That's a huge buff. That's a huge thing that could happen here. Being able to play 5 copies, really 6 copies if you add Vexing Bauble, which does cost 1, so it won't always be castable on turn 1 right away with Tezzeret. But being able to have a bunch of on the play Chalices and Vexing Baubles is a huge, probably the single biggest positive towards this card's playability. Now, those aren't the only restricted cards that this Tezzeret can get. Obviously, it can get all of the Moxen, it can get Black Lotus, it can get Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Mana Crypt. Those cards are all going to be extremely good with this card as well. Specifically, the Moxen, probably Sapphire and Pearl being the 2 big ones. This card is legitimately mana fixing for these Ancient Tomb or Workshop decks. This card can find you the colors you need to play the rest of the cards in your deck. People always, joked about Urza Saga being mana fixing. This card is legitimately mana fixing because it's going to do that right away and find it right away. And then, of course, Soul Ring and Mana Vault and Mana Crypt are going to be tons of mana. Being able to, even on turn 1, you search up a Mana Crypt with this card. On the next turn, if you still have a Tezzeret, which you probably will if you're on the play, you're going to be making 4 mana with that Mana Crypt using the untap ability. So lots of mana advantage can be gained just by casting this card and searching for mana rocks. What else does it search for? Lots of cards. It turns out the list is quite long on 1 mana cards that this thing can search for. It can search for any 1 mana hate piece for the linear decks of the format. I'm talking Grafdigger's Cage, Pithing Needle, Lantern, Spell Bomb, Soul Guide Lantern, and Spell Bomb. All of these 1 mana anti-dredge cards, usually bizarre cards, you could main deck them in your deck and have 5 copies of them. Or you can just make your deck better against those decks in general by being able to tutor for those post-board and have more ways to tutor for them. You're just going to have a stronger matchup there. What other 1 mana thing is going to get? It can get Sensei's Tops and Mishra's Baubles, the cards that draw cards. I guess you could include the Lantern and the Spell Bomb in that sense. So being able to turn your Planeswalker into a card that draws cards, or at least a card. Sensei's Top is a really powerful card selection. Really, you can only do it in Vintage. That's probably one of your best tutors for card selection / card draw. It gets a bunch of 1 mana combo equipment. Shuko in a Nadu shell, Skull Clamp in some kind of artifact creature based shell. Maybe you are tutoring Skull Clamp, and maybe there's I'm going all off the wall here, but maybe a Genesis Chamber or something that makes tokens that make this thing shoot up in loyalty. That's probably a little suspect, but it's going to get cards like Shuko and Skull Clamp and the Spear that gives lifelink. Those cards are really powerful to tutor up. It's also going to be able to tutor up removal. Probably one of the biggest things that I actually hinted on in the beginning of this is it's not CMC 1 or 0 or whatever. It's a mana value 1 or less. So we can get colored artifacts here. 2 big ones, Portable Hole and Dusk Rose Reliquary. Those are both 1 mana removal artifacts. The Portable Hole being a huge one. It's going to be able to have your Planeswalker tutor up an answer to a No Rod or a Void Mirror or something like that. There's another removal spell at 1 mana. It's a creature, Haywire Might. That's a card that hasn't seen as much play in Vintage since the restriction of Urza Saga, but it's a tutorable card that can really help you unlock different things. So that's a nice little 1 mana tutor is there. And also because this is 1 mana or less, we can actually tutor for X cost artifacts. The ones that I'm thinking of off the top of my head: Walking Ballista, Hangerback Walker, Stonecoil Serpent, and even Clown Car from the Unfinity set. The Clown Car is an X mana thing, and it also makes a bunch of artifact tokens that will maybe increase the loyalty on this Tezzeret, so that's pretty interesting. And then artifact lands. Obviously, all the lands of different colors, like Seed of the Cyanod, but also maybe even Treasure Vault. Treasure Vault could then be sacrificed to get a bunch of treasure tokens, which would also increase the loyalty on this Tezzeret. So this search is really important. It's going to be, how good is this search? How often can you cast the spells off of it? How many times can you activate this off of 1 Tezzeret? Those are all the things that we really want to think about when we're evaluating the power level of this card. The ultimate is, we're probably lucky. The ultimate is a little hit or miss. The ultimate is actually good. The thing is, the ultimate is only situationally good. It's very good. It's going to be very good against the fair decks of the format, but it's going to be pretty much useless against the combo decks. But thankfully, the -3 should be the the good ability versus the combo decks. So I actually see this ultimate as being a nice option for when you are maybe playing against something like Mono White Initiative or a Sphere Shop's Mirror or even Fair Lurrus. Being able to turn all your Moxen into creatures every turn is very powerful. And you can even keep doing this on the same artifact. If you only have one artifact, but you turn into a 3/3, you could put 3 counters on that same artifact again on the next turn. Now it's a 6/6. So this card is going to have this crazy inevitability when it gets up to this ultimate versus the fair decks, which is, I think, a nice option to have, even if I don't think it's the focal point of the card for most situations. So you can see here, all of these abilities have powerful and meaningful interactions in the current Vintage format. How do they fit into the existing Vintage decks? Right off the bat, we have to look at Mishra's Workshop decks. And I know this card isn't an artifact, so it can't be cast off the card Mishra's Workshop, but it's super easy to cast off of Ancient Tomb and Grim Monolith. And I think it has a likely home in all 3 versions of playable Shops decks right now. The first and foremost being Raker Shops. Glaring Raker Shops, this card is absolutely perfect for. It is castable and synergizes well with the Tomb Workshop Monolith, Grim Monolith base that the Raker Shops deck is using. It notably tutors for Sensei's Top, which is a key combo card for Raker. A Raker with 2 Sensei's Top is an infinite kill. So this card tutors for the Sensei's Top. It's going to provide you with that extra 4 baubles, 4 chalices, which the Raker deck really wants to restrict the opponent with. It's going to produce you fast mana, the ability to have extra colorless mana for your Raker, and it's free on the way there, right? You could go Ancient Tomb, Workshop, Karn, untap Grim Monolith, still play a Raker, and now you have a Karn sitting there. And it didn't go down in loyalty because you just used your 0 untap. It's going to untap the combo-oriented cards already in Raker Shops, Time Vault and the One Ring. And it's going to make your Raker Shops deck better against Bazaar post-board with different hate pieces. You could maybe even play some amount of those cards in the main to make you have an even better matchup against those cards. And it's worth noting that the Raker deck wants to put together 2 Sensei's Tops to go infinite with Raker, but if you put together 2 Sensei's Tops, it actually is going to give you loyalty on your Tezzeret equal to the amount of mana you have, because you draw a top, and you draw the top on top, and you draw both your tops, and your tops draw into your tops, and every time you do that, you have to pay 1 mana, but every time you pay the 1 mana and cast a top and it enters, this card goes up in loyalty. So if you assemble an early 2 Sensei's Tops, you could maybe do an early ultimate of this card, and it's still going to make you even better against the fair matchups. So this card, I think, fits it right at home in Raker Shops. Also, it'll have a lot of the similar things happening in the Prison Shops deck. Again, Tomb Workshop Monolith mana base, extra baubles and chalices, extra fast mana, tutoring possible hate pieces. I think the one thing it does differently in the Prison Shops deck and compared to the Raker Shops deck is it's going to let you be a threat tutor. I could foresee the current threat base of the Prison Shops deck changing, and you have these 4 Tezzerets that do a bunch of other things, but they also tutor for maybe 1 Walking Ballista, 1 Clown Car, and 1 Stonecoil Serpent. So that way you have these diverse series of threats. You can pick the one that makes the most sense, and you can finish off the game fast, which is what the Prison Shops deck wants. It also, interesting applications inside of Jewel. Again, we're looking at the Tomb Workshop Monolith mana base, but the biggest difference here is this card will fix Jewel for blue mana, adding 4 additional blue sources to your deck. That's a huge upgrade because the Jewel deck has a massive mana problem where it can't cast its powerful blue cards, Ancestral Time Walk, Tinker, PO. This card can always find you Sapphire and Lotus and give you the ability to cast those powerful blue cards when you want it. Obviously, extra copies of Baubles and Chalice are great. Untapping Ring and Time Vault is great. Producing extra fast mana to cast early Jewels is great. Even just untapping Jewel when you already cast the Jewel is going to give you additional blue mana, which is great. Hate pieces are going to make it better as well. But I think the real difference here is the decks are going to have to find room for it. Don't get me wrong. Jewel has one of the most restrictive deck building clauses of all the decks in Vintage. It's hard to fit new cards into Jewel. But if you can fit this card into Jewel without compromising the blue count for Force of Will too much, it's going to help fix your blue mana problem, which I think is a huge upgrade. So if that card does find a home in that deck, numbers wise, I think it could be a real big upgrade. Outside of workshops, I do think this card might see some play in Mono White Initiative. This is a very easy to cast card in Mono White Initiative, where most of the Mono White Initiative cards are not easy to cast. Mono White Initiative has historically one of the worst mana bases in all of Vintage. It can be very hard to cast even your 1 white pip cards. So the fact that this can be cast off of off-color Moxen plus Ancient Tomb on turn 1 and goes and gets your Black Lotus and Mox Pearl, that's a huge sign here. That's a huge ability. And the fact that these decks are stretching all the way to play Void Mirror, where they can now maybe choose not to play Void Mirror and instead just have the extra 4 copies of Chalice of the Void and Vexing Bauble. This card might just immediately replace Void Mirror in that sense, where you still have, this turn 1 Chalice threat, but it also is going to fix you for white mana. It might really help the mulligan situation for Mono White Initiative. Now, it doesn't just have to be a non-blue deck that plays this card. I definitely feel like it has versatility and power inside of the PO/Tinker decks of the format. Any of these big blue mana combo-oriented decks. It's worth noting that those decks will not get to play Lurrus if they play this card. However, there are other cards worth playing to not play Lurrus. Things like Karn the Great Creator and Tinker for Bolas's Citadel. The biggest thing here is probably that this card will count for 2 permanents that you can PO back. So if you go play this card for 3 mana, you can recoup most of that mana with a Mana Crypt. So it's only like a 1 mana play. And then if you then have the mana to PO, you're going to PO back this card and the Mana Crypt. On the next turn, you can use the Mana Crypt, or on the same turn, if you're going to go PO again, you can use this card to go then find another Mana Rock. Maybe you can find a bigger one, like a Mana Crypt at this point, or maybe you need to go find blue mana to make your PO, cast another PO. You can go find a Sapphire. The fact that this is 2 permanents, just like Thundertrap Trainer was, is a pretty big thing to think about for the Lurrus deck. Oh, not the Lurrus decks, I should say the PO decks. But those decks will have a little bit less to use with the untapping ability. But even then, the untap ability on a Sapphire is making double blue mana, so maybe I'm off base on that. Those decks probably don't end up on Ancient Tomb, but they could end up on Ancient Tomb if they really wanted to. Again, this has additional Vexing Baubles and Chalice of the Void. I'm going to say that every time because I think it is the most important thing to think about for this card. But when you start to get outside of the colorless decks, you actually end up with a really good selection of 1 mana cards to tutor for. And I think for the PO Tinker decks, the number one buff of this card and for those decks is that this card finds Portable Hole. Portable Hole is a great answer to Null Rod and Stony Silence. Obviously does other things like Oath of Druids and Frogs and those kind of things. But it's always hard to find, it has to be a deck that produces white mana to play the Portable Hole after you search for it with the Tezzeret. The blue Tinker and PO decks can do that. I actually think that the ultimate is actually at its best inside of the blue PO deck, which is quite interesting because it will have the most artifacts to use to turn on, and it will give the deck a plan B versus fair decks. If you don't want to, or you have a hard time going for a full combo-oriented game plan versus the fair decks, if you can ultimate this card and have your Moxen turn into threats every combat, that will be a very powerful plan B for Tinker decks. So I actually think that the ultimate is at its best inside of these decks. Though I actually think the ultimate might be at its worst inside of these decks because we'll have less artifacts to ultimate this card, you need to get to 7 loyalty, which is not an easy thing to do when your deck is not all artifacts like a Shops deck. But you could always PO some artifacts back and replay the artifacts, so maybe it's not as bad as I think. But if this card can ultimate with any kind of reliability inside of the PO Tinker deck, it'll be a nice fair plan B. Then of course, this will be the best deck to use the Time Vault Tezzeret Infinite Turns combo because your deck will likely have the black mana to pay for Demonic Tutor and Vampiric Tutor to find your Time Vault. Those are the existing decks that could use this card or may use this card. I also think that this deck card might produce new decks. The 2 decks that I had in my head when I'm looking at this card is some kind of blue-white Hate Bear style deck. I'm looking at an Ancient Tomb deck that maybe plays Clarion Conqueror. Maybe it has Portable Hole in it. it maybe has some main deck hate pieces. Maybe it could play mono white initiative, like not the 4-drop, but you could maybe play some white blue adventures. Maybe you play Archon of Emeria. Maybe you're playing Hold Breacher. But some kind of blue white hateful Ancient Tomb deck might want this card as a kind of tempo prison style deck. I don't know if that deck will end up being good, but I've always thought the deck had some interesting legs. You see it a little bit sometimes in Legacy, where you have the Roiling Dragonstorm and the Clarion Conqueror, and there's some room inside of that space to brew. And I don't think we've seen the last of big blue, 3-mana cards deck. And the most interesting and the most fun one that I will not say will be good right away, because it's kind of unlikely it will be, is this card could create a true Displacer Kitten combo deck. And we've been saying that one for years, since the printing of Displacer Kitten, and it's always been on the outskirts and fringe playability. But because this card is going to highly incentivize you to play Ancient Tomb, it'll actually be a lot easier to cast your 4-mana Displacer Kitten. And Displacer Kitten with this Tezzeret is a 2-card combo. It will go infinite, and you don't even have to put any bad cards in your deck to go infinite. So when you have a Kitten in play and you cast this Tezzeret, the Tezzeret minuses and finds a Moxen, or any 0-drop artifact. You play the Moxen, triggers the Displacer Kitten, and it flickers the Tezzeret. So with just Tezzeret and Displacer Kitten, you can get every restricted artifact from your deck and put it into your play. So that would just give you a huge amount of mana by itself. Then, as long as you have 2 Sensei's Top in your deck, which you might already have in your deck anyways, because Sensei's Top is already going to be good with the Tezzeret, so it's probably like a PO deck, theoretically. You can then, with 2 Sensei's Tops, draw top over and over again, and each time you cast top, flicker your mana vault or whatever thing that makes 2 mana. Could be any of the things that make 2 mana, and that's going to net you infinite mana. Once you have infinite mana, you can, instead of flickering the mana vault, use the 2 Sensei's Tops to flicker the Tezzeret, and use this Tezzeret to get the Sensei's Top. So you have, say you finish making your infinite mana, you have 1 Sensei's Top in play, you have 1 Sensei's Top in hand, you cast the Sensei's Top, it triggers your Displacer Kitten, you draw a random card with your Sensei's Top that's in play, and then you flicker your Tezzeret and you search back that Sensei's Top, and your other Sensei's Top resolves, and that way you can actually just draw cards through your whole deck. So you'll have infinite mana, you'll have infinite cards, you'll maybe get a Time Vault along the way, and then you can take infinite turns and win with whatever creatures you have. So the fact that this is another, with Moxen, 1-card infinite combo with Kitten, and it's a much more castable card than something like Teferi, and it's going to it's going to help you get mana to cast the Kitten early, because the Kitten's casting cost has always been pretty prohibitive. I think that is something that we definitely need to take a look at. Will it be good? Hard to say. Usually I say no, because it's historically never been enough to push that card over the edge. Everything combos with Displacer Kitten. But this is a card that absolutely warrants we retry it and see exactly how good it is. There's probably a ton more applications just like that one that I haven't thought of yet. And at 3 colorless, this card fits in basically any deck that is not playing a cat. So let me know if you can think of any cool or interesting applications for this card. Do you think that this card is going to be a vintage staple? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and we'll go back to more vintage gameplay on this YouTube channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll see you then.